Hello, welcome to the Brazilian Health Nut Show. Here you will find cutting edge information provided by the best experts in the world so you can learn how to burn fat for the rest of your life. Bruno de Gama is the Brazilian health nut in a mission to solve the problems you have when trying to lose weight forever. He is a nutritional therapy practitioner, a certified personal trainer, and a holistic lifestyle coach by the Czech Institute. Don't forget to say hello and sign up to our free newsletter at www.brazilianhealthnut.com. Let's go.
All right. Thank you so much for being here with me, Alex, today. I super appreciate your time. Can you share a little bit about your story and how did you become Miss Natural Fitness Olympia?
Yes, of course. It's a pretty long story, so I'll stick with just the key points that are more relevant to kind of how I got to, like you said, being Miss Natural Fitness Olympia and doing the kind of coaching that I do now. So, in a nutshell, I've been active my entire life, always been a mover. To the point where when I was young, my parents put me in gymnastics class because I was literally climbing on everything in the house. So they wanted to give me an activity to do, and I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with just the movement, kind of just the freedom that comes with being able to move your body and train it to do kind of whatever you want. And that sort of activity and that outlet became my go-to. Like all through my teenage years, I dabbled in sports in high school. And it was in my, early 20s when I stumbled across the bikini and fitness competition world. I was actually joining a friend for a judo class at a very small mom and pop gym in South San Francisco. And the owner of the gym happened to be a bodybuilding coach. And he said, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing one of these competitions?" And I had no idea what that world was even about, or that it really existed beyond my idea of bodybuilding, which was like, Arnold back in the day. So
Yeah.
I had no idea what he was talking about, but I was intrigued. And at the time I was personal training. I was going to college and I was just working at a local gym, helping clients. And I really personally wanted a fitness goal. I like I said, I've always moved a lot. I loved weight training, but didn't have a specific direction that I was going in. I never had a specific goal that I was shooting for. I just kind of dabbled around in the gym. So after meeting with this guy to learn about fitness competitions, I was just very, very intrigued. And I thought, what the hell? Let's just give it a try. And 6 months later, I did my first bikini competition. And this was back in 2006. So
were you doing already the backflips and all the, I don't know the name for those things, like you're going up and down and upside down? Yeah, the gymnastics.
I was
because
actually. Go ahead.
No, I saw some of your videos and it's pretty cool, like the things that you can do. It's awesome.
It's really fun. At this point, I just practice to keep it up. I'm not really trying for like any, intense, challenging skills. I just want to see what else I can do with my body and honestly be able to just do it as long as I can. So, yes, I did already have the gymnastics background and I had a lot of the skills already there when I first started competing. And so luckily that just worked out perfectly. I kind of got to combine two loves, resistance training and learning how to manipulate your body with the food that you eat. And then I had the gymnastics too. So I competed in both bikini and fitness competitions for, about 7 years, which is actually absurd now that I think about it. Just the amount of shows I did. But it was a great learning opportunity. I met so many wonderful people and really got an inside look at the fitness industry.
Yeah, because it's a very tough preparation, right? You have to be really specific with everything that you're doing during the preparation for the competition, and doing for 7 years. Yeah, it's a long time.
It was a big commitment, and I did it when I was young, in my early 20s, and this kind of how I got started in that and the way that I prepped back then, like in my early years, is so much different to how I prepped in the last few years that I competed and how I now coach other women to compete. Because back then, this was pre-Carb Nite, pre-Carb Backloading. I was literally just learning as I went. And I did make the rookie mistake of jumping on with a coach and going into it blindly. And I honestly just was given a meal plan and did it to a T. I'm the type of person, if you tell me what to do and you're my coach, I trust you and I will literally do anything and anything you tell me to do. But I did it really blindly and I didn't pay attention to my body. I didn't learn about my body at all. And at the end of each show, I really felt lost. Do you know what I mean? I had a hard time. I did everything that they said and I did get really good results, but I was hungry. I was tired.
Yeah.
I worked myself to the ground. I mean, it was the amount of time I was spending in the gym in those early years. It was like a part-time job. I mean, trying to have a social life in your early 20s and doing that and going to school was really
I thought you were still in your early 20s, to be honest with you.
Oh, well, thank you. We'll just say that I am.
Okay. Yeah, you look very young. So on your bio, you actually share a little bit about this, that there is not just one way to get fit, and you share a little bit about your story with cheat days. Can you talk a little bit about those things that you learned through this journey?
Yes. Well, early on, pre-Carb Nite and pre-Carb Backloading, cheats were, just what they are. They were cheats. They weren't, even though they were occasionally prescribed to me on that original plan that I was following, which was very, very low fat, carb heavy, cheat days were maybe once in a blue moon. And generally, because I was competing so often, they were always right after the show. So it was like, okay, I've dedicated, 3-4 months to getting to the competition ready. And then after the show, go ahead and have a cheat meal. But then after that, you got to get right back on. And that included things, it was very restrictive. Even things like dairy. It was like after the show, it was like, oh, okay, I can have a little bit of cheese here, a little bit of yogurt. But there was still like this guilt associated with it because
were you counting calories as well?
I was, yes, which was very tedious.
Yeah,
and I was hungry.
Boring.
And it was very boring. The palate was very limiting. But, I like to cook too, so I did try my best to make what I was allowed to eat as delicious as possible. So I got very creative in the kitchen. I was like, how many different ways can I make chicken? Because literally that's all I ate was chicken and broccoli and egg whites, which are quite bland and boring.
Yeah. So what happens when people go on a restricted calorie like this in terms of biological terms? Can you give a little scientific explanation for people who are a little more geeky on the side?
Absolutely. Well, one thing that I experienced early on is in my first year of competing, I honestly just did everything myself and I was winging it most of the time and literally just ate based on how I was feeling and did very, very little cardio. And I never had a rebound after the show. Once I signed up with a coach and was given a very, very specific regimen that was, I was counting all my macros and calories. By the time the show came, I was so depleted and hungry and tired, like aches all over my body. Not a good feeling. When I would have that cheat after the show, the next morning I would be physically sore to the touch all over. Like It almost felt like I was bruised or I had done an incredible workout all over my body and very light to the touch. And I imagine it's because I ingested a significant amount of carbohydrates. I had gone into that cheat meal a little dehydrated as well. So now at that point, I'm holding a pretty good amount of water. And it just pushed against the skin and caused a lot of inflammation that I could feel all over. So you want to, you go into it wanting to enjoy this meal. And you're obviously excited about it because it's been months on end since you've had it. But the way that I always felt afterwards, just that first day afterwards was not pleasant at all. But surprisingly enough, no, not at all. I would get headaches, very, very sluggish, like extremely fatigued, a lot of fogginess in the brain, which some people can experience on their first few carb nights, which we can probably get into in a little bit. But following that, it was, I generally looked better actually, which isn't a surprise now. You know, the next day, even though I was feeling pretty achy and just not well, my body hurt a little bit, but I usually looked really good. The next morning, I always looked really good. But then after that, like I mentioned earlier, I never knew what to do with my food. It's like, do I go back to the restricted way that I was eating, or do I have a little bit more liberty with my food and just see what happens? And depending on when I had my next show, if my show was close by, then it was like get right back on.
How
And
often
every
were you
time I did
competing,
that,
like the shows?
it could have ranged from 6 weeks to 3 or 4 months.
Okay.
Generally, like the season for me was often started in May, and there would be I would do a May show, a June show, a big show in August, which was like Miss Fitness USA's, which was at the time was like the big show of the year. And then there was usually one more in November, which was Fitness America. So I did get a nice break from the big show in August to the big show in November. But for 3 years in a row before I discovered Carb Nite, that stretch in between the August and November show was really, really challenging. Because
Yeah,
I
I can
had a
only
little bit
imagine.
more time, I wanted to take a little bit of a break or just allow more food variety in my meal planning. But it was so hard to get back into shape after that. It wasn't
Yeah.
like, oh, I can maintain what I've built up until that point. I would put on weight. And luckily, in comparison to some of the other competitors that I got to know, I didn't put on much weight. You know, a couple pounds here or there. Luckily, I've always kind of been within a short range of weight, but I was definitely softer. I mean,
Cool.
visual abs were gone. And each time I
Cool.
did that, it got harder and harder to cut.
Okay, cool. So let's talk now about Carb Nite. You already mentioned a couple of times. And for people who don't know what Carb Nite is, can you give a little bit of a background? And I think we also should mention the work of John Kiefer.
Yes, absolutely. John Kiefer is the creator of both Carb Nite and Carb Backloading. And I mean, looking back, he was like my saving grace at the time.
How long ago was
it worked out. This was back in 2010. So it's
Okay, so
been a
6
long
years.
time. It's been a long time, yes. And I met him. He's local as well. And at the time, I was holding posing workshops for local competitors. And he had just started coaching some bikini competitors. And so through just the fitness world, we met and I started doing stage coaching for a few of his clients. And that's how I met him. And at that time, I was really, really struggling with my diet and competing. And I was losing faith in my coach at the time. I had no control. I didn't know what to do. And his girls looked great. And they all talked about how much food they could eat. I was like, okay, this sounds good. So we met and let's see, we met in October of 2010. And after talking with him and me explaining what my goals were and what was important to me, I basically said, I want to eat a little bit more variety of food. I want to know what to eat at any given time. And I want to look and feel good all the time. And he said, oh, I can make that happen. I know I have exactly what you need. He explained everything, you know, it very generally, which is it's a cyclical ketogenic diet. So for anywhere from 5 to 7 days, you're ultra low carb, so under 30 grams of usable carbs every day.
Okay. And that's
depending on
starch and grains and anything? Or how are you in terms of these 30 grams? Does it matter where it's coming from?
not really. As long as it's usable carbs. So when you're looking at a nutrition label, you look at the total carb count, and then usually the fiber count is right below that. You subtract the fiber count from the total carbohydrates, and that's the number that's really important. So say with almonds, there's about 7 grams of carbs for an ounce of almonds. It usually has 3 grams of fiber. So then you're actually left with only 4 grams of usable carbs. So when you're counting your carbs, that's the number that's very important, because the goal on these low carb days is to control blood sugar levels. We just want to keep them nice and balanced for as many days as we can, up till 7 days. And then on the seventh day...
Sorry. So how does a typical day looks like in terms of when it's not Carb Night? Because we're going to be talking about the Carb Night day, right? Which is completely different.
Yes.
So can you just give it like a little example of how your day would look like?
Absolutely. I'll just run through yesterday, just because it's fresh in my mind. And most of my days look very, very similar. I'm just a creature of habit, so it works out that way. But I usually start my morning with a cup of coffee with about 1 to 2 tablespoons of heavy whipping cream, which I look forward to every morning. It's like my favorite thing. I wake up just to have my coffee. And luckily more coffee shops like Starbucks and Peet's Coffee, they're starting to serve heavy cream, which is fantastic. So it makes it easy to be able to go out and grab a cup of coffee too. And anywhere from 1 to 3 hours after I have my coffee, depending on the day, I'll have either a early lunch or a late breakfast, and that's usually a few pieces of bacon, a couple eggs, either fried in coconut oil, or I might do a scramble with the bacon and some sausages. I might throw in some spinach and bell peppers, things like that. Or I might just eat leftover meat from the night before, and I might just throw a salad in there. Or I often make things for dinner that make delicious leftovers. Like, they almost get better as they sit a little longer.
Yeah, that's
and
so
I love
true.
It does. It does.
I know.
It really does. So the next day is always good.
I just told this to my mom because I had some leftover food, I think 2 days ago, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is like better than yesterday." It was like, great, cool. So
yeah,
keep
all the
going.
flavors
Sorry.
just meld together.
Yeah.
And I'm usually a middle of the day lifter. So if I go to the gym, it's usually going to be between like 1 and 3. So I'm usually after breakfast or an early lunch, I'm usually good until I go to the gym. And I might have a cup of coffee, just black coffee, before if I feel like I need a little something. Otherwise, I do my training. About an hour after I train, I have my post-workout shake, which is usually for me just to whey isolate, and I'll add some Carb Shock and creatine. And then about an hour after that, or depending on when I'm hungry, I'll either have a snack, which could be like, I'm on a salami kick right now, so I've been eating a lot of salami. But it's just easy. I like to have things that are just convenient. I don't have to make them. I can just, open the fridge, pull few pieces out, and be good for a while. Otherwise, I might snack on some almonds or something like that. I also like to cook up a lot of drumsticks. I'll cook up like a bunch of them and then just have those as easy grabs, because I don't need a fork either. So I could just pick it up and munch on it.
Gotcha.
And dinner's
Sounds
usually
good.
where I have a little bit more fun. So dinner's where I get a little bit more creative. And I mean, I could do anything from meatballs to, I do Italian sausages a lot, lots of chicken, ground beef, make taco salad. I do taco meat a lot because it's easy and convenient, and I can make a lot of things with the taco meat. It's one of my favorite go-tos.
Hey guys, what's up? Bruno Gama here, Brazilian Health Nut, and let's take a little break from the show because I would like to offer you something. If you go to my website, www.brazilianhealthnut.com, and click on the page Burn Fat Forever, you can go ahead and claim your free consultation with me right now, okay? Or you can just send me an email at brazilianhealthnut@gmail.com. So you can start to lose weight and feel healthier right now, okay? So go ahead and claim your free consultation with me, and remember that spots are limited, okay? Now let's get back to the show. Yeah, so people might be thinking right now, oh, it's a lot of meat. Aren't you eating any vegetables in terms of like greens? Because, a lot of people are talking, oh, we have to have a lot of greens. So what's your take on that? Are you having enough?
Yes. I try to shoot for 20 to 25 grams of fiber a day, and that could be coming from a variety of veggies. And depending on how I'm feeling, if I'm particularly hungry, I might choose a veggie that has a little more volume, like lettuce. Lettuce, I could have a couple cups of it and still be within the carb count. If I want something more like tomatoes or something that tends to be a little bit more carby, I'll just keep those portions small. But one of my favorite salads is sliced tomatoes, cucumbers, and red onions. And I'll just do a little apple cider vinegar. Delicious. I also do a lot of colored greens and mustard greens. They're a little bit heartier of a greens, leafy greens, but full of vitamins and minerals. So I try to choose not only volume of food, but nutrient dense items.
Yeah. Gotcha. Sounds very tasty too. Awesome. So let's talk now about the Carb Nite day. Okay. So you've been doing this for 5 to 7 days. You're very low carb, and then the 7th day comes. So Carb Nite. So how does this day look like? Tell us a little bit about this. The night, of course, and I don't know.
The night, of course,
maybe
yes. Well, generally the morning starts off just like any other morning. I'll still have my heavy cream and coffee. I'll have a normal lunch of just protein, fat, and a little bit of veggies. And depending on what time I'm planning on going to bed, I shoot for a 6 to 7 hour feeding window of time for my carb nights. And usually it's on the weekends, so I tend to go to bed later. So I might not start till 5 o'clock, somewhere around there. And if I can coordinate it with my workouts, I will work out in the afternoon on those days. It doesn't always work out that way. And if it doesn't work out, I don't really worry about it. But if I do work out, then I'll usually start Carb Nite with my post-workout shake. And I'll put in some frozen bananas, which is one of my favorite things, or I'll snack on banana chips. So usually that first spike, which is what we're going for on Carb Nite, we're trying to achieve roughly 3 solid insulin spikes throughout this feeding window. And so I always like to choose things that I'm either craving during the week or that just sound good to me. I won't just eat a burger to eat a burger. I want it to be satisfying and satiating and all of that, and have it be fun too. So I love things like chips and salsa to kickstart Carb Nite, something snacky. It's great if you're with friends too. You can be social and go out to eat and not have to, have a little bit more freedom at that point, which is nice. And dinner can just be, it could be a burger and fries. I do love sweet potato fries. Well, sweet potatoes in any form, any way, are delicious. So that's like a fun go-to. I did a French dip. Do you know what a French dip is? I did that last week. It's sliced roast
I don't know what
beef.
it is.
It's so good. It's so good. It's sliced roast beef on like a toasted baguette, like a French roll. And sometimes there's like onions, like grilled onions, but it comes in this au jus sauce. That's the sauce from the roast. And you dip it in. It's so good. It's like salty and crunchy, and you kind of get all the yummy flavors and textures. So that's what I had last week.
You're keeping pretty clean though, like you're eating healthy foods, even though it's carbohydrates, and I don't want to get into if carbohydrates are unhealthy or not. But I remember when I was reading the book, and John was like, "Oh, you can actually go crazy. Any like ice cream, you have to go crazy. You have to have a lot of carbohydrates and cakes and cookies and all those things, right? But you're keeping really clean. I don't know, because the book was 6-7 years ago, right? So I don't know how is he doing in terms of recommendation for this part of the Carb Nite, but you probably can talk a little bit more about this.
Yes. Well, I definitely do still eat the junky stuff, but I tend to save those for dessert. So just because I've been doing this for so long now, I've really just played with the variety of carb types, carb quantities, and what I've come to decide for myself personally. And I think that anybody who attempts to do this or wants to give it a try, whether it's for a specific short-term goal or, just a lifestyle, is use each Carb Nite as an opportunity to experiment. And what I've experimented with over the years is what's out of my carb choices, what's going to make me feel the best, what's going to help me yield the most, the greatest results, and what's going to leave me feeling just generally or genuinely satisfied. I want to finish my meal and be like, that was exactly what I wanted. I'm full. I feel good. It tasted delicious. And I'm sort of a carb snob at this point. Like there have been times where I've ordered something on Carb Nite and started eating it and realized it was not what I wanted. And so I stopped eating it and then ordered something else.
Got you.
I do recommend that. I don't want to just eat blindly and eat whatever I can because it's my opportunity to, because that's a great way of overdoing it. And there honestly have been numerous times early on when I first started where I really put the carbs down. I mean, I just went at it, and it landed me on the floor so full that I couldn't hang out with my friends the rest of the night. I was like, I just need to go to sleep. I overdid it. And honestly, that's just trial and error. So, but I definitely enjoy my dessert.
Yeah. And people are listening to this right now, and they might be thinking, oh, so why aren't you just keeping every day the same? Why are you having this Carb Nite? Because from what I remember, Carb Nite is a must, actually. You must have this night of carbohydrate festival.
Yes, you must. Agreed.
Yeah.
For any goal, for any person, regardless of where you're at fitness-wise, that one night is essential, whether you're exercising or not. And then from that point, once you've kind of determined your baseline, like for me, I'll always have my Carb Nite. Regardless of what my goal is, regardless of where I'm at training-wise, I will always have my once-a-week Carb Nite. Now, at this point, depending on what my training is like, if I'm training intensely, I might add in a small backload midweek. I might add 2 midweek. Again, at that point, adding in additional backloads of carbs during the week in between my Carb Nites will vary depending on what my activity level is like on any given week. So a couple weeks ago, I was really busy. I just didn't have time to get into the gym. So I stuck with Carb Nite and I did it once that week. And that was it. And it's simple and it's easy. I don't have to overthink it.
Yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit about...
I should say.
Yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit about carb backloading in a little bit. But before that, what's the biggest mistakes that you see people making when they are trying to follow this program, the Carb Nite program?
Well, let's touch on the low carb days first. And oftentimes what I see is people will overdo it, will overeat on those days too. Some people might go into it thinking, oh, well, if I'm not having the carbs, then I can have as much fat and protein as I want. And a lot of people too will come from, at least as I've noticed, a lot of people will come from a ketogenic background where they're not ever having carbs. And generally, a ketogenic recommends very high percentage of fat intake. Moderate protein, but very, very high fat intake. And while that does work for some, it doesn't work for others. And I found that the lower the body fat of the individual, the less fat percentage that's needed on those low carb days. And that, honestly, that's just something that each individual is going to have to play with a little bit. But if you're eating low carb and you're not seeing any loss, and that's the goal, you could just be overeating. So that's the number one thing, is just overeating in general, because fat is very calorie dense. And even though the volume of the fat, a tablespoon of coconut oil doesn't look like much, but it's packed with calories. And while, we're not necessarily counting calories on this plan, there will come a point where you're going to eat too much or undereat. And again, that's just playing with each individual's needs and playing with it. And so that's where tracking at the beginning can be very helpful, just to give you a baseline.
Cool. Okay, so my last question here about Carb Nite before we get into the carb backloading part is, who should not do Carb Nite? Because I think this is not a program to every single person in the earth, right?
That's correct. Although it can be manipulated very easily to fit pretty much any goal, I think, personally. But one population that should be careful with it are those who are diabetic. So while Carb Nite can actually work very, very well in controlling blood glucose levels, especially during the low carb days, if someone is on insulin, they're going to want to work with their doctor and monitor what those Carb Nites look like. Because again, they can be beneficial, but for someone who is taking insulin, that's something that you'd want to be very careful of. Because hypoglycemia can happen. A lot of unpleasant things can happen for an individual who is dealing with diabetes. So if you are and you want to give it a try, definitely find a doctor that will work with you on it. I mean, Dr. Rocky is great, and I believe that he still does consults for outside patients as well. And I've sent a few patients his way to help them kind of figure that out. The other scenario is someone who trains a lot. Maybe they're doing recreational sports. Maybe they're professional.
I think that's me, Alex.
Yeah. Then
I'm pretty active.
One night a week. Yeah. One night a week's
I'm pretty
not
active.
enough. Yeah. Then you're going to need more frequent carb refeeds at that point. You can probably still stick with your one big carb night, but then you have to strategically place smaller backloads during the week according to either what your training is like or what your performance is like. And again, that takes some trial and error just to find out what's going to work for you and your schedule.
Yeah, I try to go for like a week of just very, very low carb. And my exercise routine was still pretty intense. And I was not feeling the same. And I was like, oh, there is something going on here. So I just started to do a little bit more of a carb backloading, like you just mentioned. And I started feeling great again. So yeah, you have to know yourself, first of all, and you have to see your physical activity level for sure. So let's get into the carb backloading part. So what's the biggest difference between Carb Nite and carb backloading?
Well, beyond the more frequent carb refeeds during the week, the quantity and the frequency are really going to vary from person to person and activity level and schedule and all of that. But the primary goal of using carb backloading is either for strength or performance goals. And that could also be gaining lean muscle mass as well. So maybe you're on a hypertrophy program and you're trying to build, or what we used to call the bulking phase when I was in the competing world. And luckily nowadays we can bulk without getting fat, which is amazing to be able to do that. But the only difference at that point is again, the carb backloads are more frequent, and I don't want to say they're smaller necessarily, but for the average person, they're going to be a little smaller of a win.
How small is that?
I mean, that could range from 50 grams to 100, 150.
Okay. So you're starting your day very low, and then you start to gradually adding a little bit more of carbohydrates. And then in the evening, that's when you have your biggest meal in terms of carbohydrates, right? Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Cool. And that could be done either with dinner or with dessert or both. It kind of depends on the person and what their schedule's like.
And what about in terms of the difference of people now that you see doing both, right? Doing Carb Nite and carb backloading. What kind of people do you see having more success with carb backloading comparing to Carb Nite, right?
Just those who I would say are a little bit more experienced, more veterans to the exercise world for a few reasons. Generally, they have a better understanding of their bodies. That if they are an athlete, they know their bodies pretty well. And at that point, it should be, if they're paying attention, it should be easy for them to manipulate the programs to fit. And that takes some trial and error. It's like, oh, I've eaten this amount, and then I did this activity, and this is how I felt. And there will be a fairly large difference in quantity and frequency between men and women. So when we are talking about, amounts, that will vary greatly between genders as well as activity levels.
Gotcha.
Did I answer?
So, Alex, I have to ask you this because 9 out of the 10 conversations that I have with talking about specifically about breakfast, people will say, oh, I'm going to have more carbs in the breakfast because that's when I'm going to be burning my energy and blah, blah, blah. So why are you having actually the carbohydrates during the evening and not in the morning?
Hormonally speaking, our bodies are in a better position in the evenings to utilize those carbohydrates in a more effective way. And I like to think of it like if I'm going to try to explain it to like the average person who might not fully understand the physiology, I like to explain it like we wake up in the morning and we're all burning fat. Everyone's burning fat in the mornings. And what we've grown up to understand is that, oh, let's eat the carbs in the morning so that we burn them off through the day.
Yeah,
Which,
juice. Here in Brazil, it's like it's always the same thing. Like most people they have bread with some butter and some fruits and some OJ. It's like a typical breakfast for people, and I say that's a bomb of carbohydrates right there.
Right. And what happens at that point is it literally shuts off any fat burning that was happening. So we wake up, we're all burning fat. You introduce anything that could cause a little bit of an insulin spike, and you've shut that system off. So we had the potential to burn fat for a little bit longer, but we've just shut that off by introducing carbohydrates. And now our body has to burn off all those carbs during the day before it can tap back into fat stores, which doesn't sound like a good idea.
Yep, not at all.
I'd rather keep that process going as long as possible.
Yeah, makes sense. What about the exercise routine? Should we change anything? Are we exercising on the fast mode or no fasting? How does your exercise routine looks like for your carb backloading?
In terms of the style of training?
Yeah, like your philosophy around the exercise thing. Like, are you just lifting? Are you jogging? Are you sprinting? You know what I mean? Like, how does your week look like in terms of exercise?
So for me personally, I feel like I've almost found like the magic combination, both in what is going to get me the results I want and also what makes me the happiest. And this honestly took me a long time because there were, especially early on in competing, there were many years where I was doing activities that I thought I had to do, but honestly hated, like running. Yeah. I hate running. I just don't enjoy it. It doesn't feel good. It's boring. And I'm more of a short burst, like let's get some high intensity and then we'll take a little break, which goes back to my gymnastics days. And what I found for me personally, the best combination is 2 to 3 days of resistance training. And I follow Shockwave protocol, which is a lifting program that was created to go along with Carb Nite. And how long are you in?
How long are you in the gym for this? Like for these 2 to 3 days, just so I have an idea here of timing.
60 minutes. And that's with like a 15, 20-minute warm-up. I do a very, very thorough, in-depth warm-up before I do any physical activity. I just feel
that's not a lot of time, right? Because that's one thing that I have changed a lot throughout the last probably 4 to 5 years when I started learning all this cool stuff, about my timing, because I want to be super efficient with my timing. I don't want to be wasting, like you said before, like a part-time job just to exercise, right? So I want to do everything in terms of health, but also in terms of time, really. So yeah, and nowadays I don't spend much time on the gym. Like you, I go probably twice, not even 3 times, and I'm there for 30 to 45 minutes, that's it. And then I do some sprinting once every 7 to 10 days, and I just walk a lot. I mean, I'm pretty active every day in terms of walking, hiking, just being in nature, just moving around. And I think that's super important for people, because a lot of people are just like, oh, I don't have time, so we have to find something like that fits their schedule, right? So keep going, sorry.
And I like what you said about, being outdoors, because that's one of my requirements for myself is I only want to I don't want to live in the gym, because I used to do that. So I want to be in and out, get that part done, because I do love it still. But if you're there for too long or going there too frequently, you start to kind of resent it a little bit. So I always want to choose activities that make me feel really good, that I get excited about, that I feel accomplished after doing. And then I just kind of feel fulfilled in a variety of ways. And for me, I need to be outside at least once a week. So whether that's going on a long walk around the city, which is quite hard because of all the hills, to be honest, or to go on a hike. This past weekend, I actually went to Tahoe and I snowboarded for the first time, which was amazing.
How was that?
So much fun. It was great. I felt like I was hit by a car the next day, but it was great.
Yeah,
but I just love being outside. It doesn't feel like exercise at that point. It feels fun. And that's also why I like practicing gymnastics still, because It makes me feel young. It makes me feel like a kid again. I can flip around. It's just a completely different way of using your body. So, I like to have variety in the activities that I do. It keeps me excited. It also helps with just overall conditioning of the body too, which I find to be helpful for a lot of different reasons. But again, just getting to know my body and what it needs and what it can do.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. What about the supplementation part? Do you have anything that you want to share with us in terms of supplements that you think, I think those are really cool for you guys to have?
Absolutely. I mean, you have your essentials for anybody on any diet or way of eating. There's going to be supplementation that's required because we just don't simply eat enough nutrient-dense foods to get everything that we need, unless you're eating organ meat several times a week, which personally I'm not a fan of. I've tried, I just can't do it. So I need to get certain vitamins and minerals from other sources. I take a multivitamin, and multivitamins can contain a lot of different levels of vitamins and minerals. So sometimes it's a matter of just finding the one that's more appropriate for each individual. Just like there's a difference between a female and a man's multivitamin. I also take high quality fish oil. I do Norwegian salmon, very, very high quality. I do T3 Fuel, which I found to be extremely helpful. And it's one of those things where you don't realize how big of a difference it made until you've been taking it for maybe just like a month. I think I noticed a difference. But then looking back, I was like, how did I go so long without taking this? And just how good I felt. For women especially, I find it to be extremely helpful. I also do vitamin D3. San Francisco is pretty foggy most of the time, so I don't get a lot of sunlight. And I work inside, so unless I'm really taking advantage of walking outside, I know I'm not getting enough vitamin D3. Which for fat loss especially is extremely helpful. And that's an easy one to get tested in your labs.
I just got tested last week, and I think was 100 my levels, which is high. But I think it's good, but I'm like some people are like, oh, that's a little bit too high. What are you doing? And I was like, well, I'm in Brazil right now, and I'm going to the beach pretty much every day for a walk. So I'm on the sun all the time.
Yeah. And what's funny is how we absorb the vitamin D, if we are getting it from being outside, is very different than what most people think. I've heard a few different things, but one of them was, it's 20 minutes with sunlight on the top of your head. But I've also heard that you shouldn't go and take a shower right afterwards. Like, it takes a while for your body to actually absorb that into your system. And
I heard that too. For 1 hour. You do get
a little sunlight, and then you go and take a shower, you just washed it all off.
Yep.
Which seems a little counterintuitive.
Yeah. Cool.
And
right.
I do creatine for my post-workout shake as well, which I find to be extremely helpful for recovery and gains.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all this information. Alex, is there anything that I haven't asked you today that you think it's nice to share with our audience today?
I don't think so. I think we covered everything for the most part. Yeah. I mean, I think just paying attention to your body and understanding that in any program that you do, there's going to be some level of experimentation. So tracking can be helpful. And that just because once you've found a way that works for you doesn't mean that there still isn't opportunity to tweak it or manipulate it along the way, because we're always changing. So just being open to that and keeping it simple.
Cool. Thank you so much. So where can people find you, and what's next for you now?
Oh, my goodness. Well, for information on either protocol, Carb Nite, Carb Backloading, body.io is the place to go. People can also check out my podcast. It's female focused. It's called Her Body. We talk about a variety of topics for health, fitness, and performance. And then if you're interested in any recipes, cookbooks, food information, you can go to fitlivingfoodies.com. And that's where the Transforming Recipes cookbooks are. And all of those are geared for the ultra low carb days for following either protocol. So lots of just yummy recipes and ideas to help make the process a little bit smoother. And next on the agenda for me, a couple things I can't talk about quite yet, but there is another cookbook in the works and some other fun just tools. I want to help create as many tools as possible to make this process easier for everybody. So I'm excited.
Awesome.
Lots of fun stuff.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and I talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thanks for listening to the Brazilian Health Nut Show. Go to www.brazilianhealthnut.com for much more information about how to burn fat for the rest of your life. Hasta luego.